On the night of October 17, 2014, in a forgotten coastal town called Blackridge that barely appeared on maps and was known only for its endless fog, rotting fishing docks, and the way its cliffs seemed to swallow sound, a security guard named Thomas Hale clocked in for his graveyard shift at the abandoned Marlow Psychiatric Hospital, a massive concrete complex built in the 1950s to house the violently disturbed and officially shut down in 2004 after decades of unexplained patient deaths, nurse suicides, missing staff, and one infamous murder-suicide that locals still whispered about. Yet the property remained guarded because the land was tangled in lawsuits, corporate disputes, and unresolved investigations. And Thomas, a former Marine who had survived 2 combat tours and carried a deep scar across his chest from shrapnel, believed this job would be easy money, just walking empty halls, checking doors, and watching security monitors until sunrise. A job far safer than anything he had done overseas. But everything changed the moment he noticed the first footprint in the dust-covered hallway on the 3rd floor. A single barefoot print facing the wrong direction, as if the person had been walking backward, which instantly made his skin crawl because the building had been sealed all day and he was the only one with access. And when he knelt to examine it, he realized the toes were pressed unusually hard, as if whoever made it had been dragging their foot backward deliberately. And when he radioed his partner, Mark Ellison, stationed outside in the parking lot, the signal broke into heavy static and cut off mid-sentence, forcing Thomas to investigate alone. His flashlight beam shaking slightly as it glided across peeling walls, flickering fluorescent lights, and rusted patient doors with scratched numbers and gouged wood, as if someone had clawed their way out years ago, until he heard a low, steady humming sound drifting from room 312, the same room where a patient named Alina Wright had brutally murdered 2 nurses with a stolen scalpel before hanging herself from a shower rod in 2003. A case Thomas vaguely remembered from old news articles his wife used to read aloud, and as he approached, the humming stopped abruptly, replaced by slow, deliberate breathing that sounded far too close. And when he pushed the door open, he found the room empty except for an old wooden rocking chair moving gently back and forth, its rhythm too perfect to be caused by a draft, and carved into the wall behind it were fresh words written in what looked like dried blood. "He's not gone," which made Thomas's stomach drop because the killer known locally as the Backward Man, a legend blamed for a string of ritualistic murders in the early 90s, was supposedly caught and executed years ago, yet the writing style matched his signature perfectly. Letters carved backward so they could only be read in a mirror. And Thomas suddenly remembered stories from his childhood, how bodies were found posed backward, necks twisted, limbs bent wrong. Victims always discovered facing walls, and as he stepped back in shock, he felt something cold brush against his ankle, looking down to see a severed finger sliding slowly across the floor toward him, still wearing a faded hospital tag with a patient number. And before he could even scream, the lights cut out, plunging the hallway into total darkness, where he heard footsteps circling him in an unnatural rhythm, heel to toe, toe to heel, walking backward. And a dry whisper slid directly into his ear saying, "You weren't supposed to see me," sending a violent shock through his body as he spun around, finding nothing there. Yet the metallic smell of blood grew stronger, and suddenly his radio crackled back to life with Mark screaming, "Thomas, someone just came out of the building." He was walking backward and smiling, followed by a loud gunshot and silence, and Thomas bolted toward the stairwell, heart pounding so hard he thought it would burst, only to find the building had changed, corridors stretching unnaturally long, doors opening into brick walls, staircases looping back upward, exit signs leading deeper inside, as if the hospital itself was warping to trap him, while the whisper followed him constantly, repeating personal details about his life that no stranger could possibly know, including his daughter Lily's favorite bedtime song, the exact night his wife died in a car crash, the words she spoke on the phone seconds before impact, and the guilt he carried because he had been too tired to drive her himself, making him realize this thing wasn't just stalking him, It had been watching him for a very long time, and as he ran, he began seeing reflections in broken mirrors of himself walking backward, smiling at his own terrified face. And when he finally reached the lobby, he tripped over Mark's body, eyes frozen wide open, mouth stretched in a permanent scream, and carved into his forehead were the words, "Turn around." And before Thomas could even process what he was seeing, he felt hands clamp onto his shoulders from behind, ice cold and impossibly strong, forcing him to turn. And he came face to face with a man whose joints were bent backward, elbows reversed, knees bending the wrong way, neck twisted unnaturally so his face stared upside down. Yet he was smiling calmly, eyes full of recognition, and he spoke in a soft, almost friendly tone. "You see me now, so you belong to me." And Thomas realized with horror that the man's voice sounded exactly like his own, and the figure lifted a rusted scalpel. But instead of attacking Thomas, he slowly dragged the blade across his own throat, spilling blood everywhere while never breaking eye contact, collapsing at Thomas's feet, and Thomas screamed and stumbled outside into the freezing fog, where police sirens soon filled the air. And when officers searched the hospital, they found no trace of the twisted man's body. Only Thomas's fingerprints on a bloody scalpel, and surveillance footage showed Thomas walking backward through the corridors earlier that night, smiling directly at the cameras, something he had absolutely no memory of doing. And the investigation uncovered that the messages carved on the walls matched Thomas's handwriting perfectly, even though he swore he never wrote them. And during his trial, prosecutors showed video of him standing over Mark's body, carving letters into his skin. And the jury watched in horror as Thomas on the screen calmly walked backward out of frame, smiling, and despite his desperate pleas, he was convicted of multiple murders and sentenced to life in Blackridge Prison, where strange things began happening almost immediately. Inmates reporting seeing a man walking backward through the cell blocks at night, whispering their names through the bars, guards finding backward footprints in restricted areas, security cameras glitching whenever someone walked past in reverse, and Thomas himself screaming in his sleep, begging someone not to make him turn around again, because he said every night he dreamed of himself smiling, walking backward towards someone new, someone who hadn't seen him yet, someone who soon would. And years later, a documentary crew interviewed former hospital staff who revealed the truth about the backward man, that he was never executed, but disappeared during a prisoner transfer when all guards reported seeing him walk backward into a dark hallway and vanish. And the last known footage showed him smiling at the camera as if he knew someone else would take his place. And when the crew tried to access old hospital archives, they found a final patient file added in 2014 under Thomas Hale's name, diagnosis: contagious perception disorder, note stating. Once you see him, you become him. And shortly after the documentary aired, multiple viewers reported nightmares of a man walking backward out of their television screens, whispering their names. And in Blackridge, residents swear they sometimes see someone standing at the edge of the foggy cliffs at night, facing the ocean but walking backward toward the road, smiling, waiting for someone to notice him. Because the curse only works if you look. And now that you've imagined him, the question is simple. When you go to sleep tonight, will you dream of walking backward too? And if you do, will you remember when it started, or will you wake up smiling, already part of the story, already walking towards someone new who hasn't seen you yet, someone who soon will?